The sunlight was filtering through the gauze curtains when I glanced at my reflection, pausing with the coffee mug halfway to my lips. The quietness of the morning had become something I treasured, not because I craved solitude but because it was rare. Most days started like this. Just me and Chris, the quiet rhythm of our little world humming softly around us. Chris had just turned 23 and I was 44, though I rarely felt it. Maybe it was the modeling. When your job is to stay in shape and sell beauty, you learn to blur the edges of age. Or maybe it was Chris himself. His presence had always made me feel younger, livelier. We shared the same stubborn smile, the same dry sense of humor, the same soft spot for sarcastic commentary and long, wandering conversations about everything from photography to the worst-dressed celebrities on Instagram. Is that bedhead intentional? I teased when he walked into the kitchen, shirtless, towel slung over one shoulder, his hair a glorious mess of sandy waves. He grinned, shameless. It's the I just woke up flawless look. You wouldn't understand. Please, I rolled my eyes. I invented that look in '04. He chuckled as he reached for the coffee pot. You're probably right. But I wear it better. We bantered like that every day. The people we used to date never understood it. How close we were. Too close, they hinted sometimes. But when you've spent years depending on each other, trusting each other more than anyone else, closeness becomes your language. I divorced Chris's father when Chris was only 8. The man was decent enough, but our marriage had unraveled slowly, thread by thread. He was comfortable in his detachment, always acting older than he was, like he'd skipped midlife and gone straight into retirement mode, reading newspapers with a furrowed brow while I still wanted to dance in the kitchen and paint my lips red just because. After the divorce, it was just me and Chris. And we did more than survive. We became a team. Dating, though, that was a carousel of ridiculousness. I swear, I muttered as I scrolled through my phone later that afternoon. This guy's bio says he likes long walks and classic vinyls. What is this, a dating profile or an audition for a retirement home? Chris burst out laughing from across the living room. Mom, you have to stop bullying your matches. I'm not bullying, I said, faux offended. I'm observing. And sharing. Like any good citizen of the 21st century. He raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. You literally told the last guy he dressed like a history professor lost on his way to a strip mall. To be fair, I said, he did wear loafers with tassels. And I think his jeans had pleats. Chris whistled low. Criminal. We laughed together, and as usual, I felt that warm, inexplicable ease that came only with him. I never had to explain myself around Chris. He saw all of me, the confident, composed woman I showed the world and the restless, sometimes lonely version of me I kept hidden. And he never looked away. I don't get it, he said later while we were sorting outfits for a joint modeling campaign. Why do you keep going out with these guys when you know within 5 minutes they're not what you want? I hesitated, holding up a vintage suede jacket. Because I keep hoping I'm wrong. He looked at me for a moment, expression unreadable. You're never wrong. You just don't want to be right. I smiled at that but didn't respond. Because he wasn't wrong. Chris knew me better than anyone in ways that had nothing to do with how long he'd known me. He had this uncanny way of seeing me, all of me, and not flinching. Sometimes it was almost disarming. We could be in the middle of a photo shoot, both of us in sleek designer wear, trading jokes with the crew, and then he'd glance at me in a quiet second and I'd catch it. The way his gaze softened, lingered, like he was seeing something no one else could. I never spoke about it. I didn't dare name it. That night we lay on the couch, flipping through Netflix without actually watching anything, our limbs lazily draped, comforted by presence alone. He passed me a handful of popcorn without looking and I took it like I always did, fingers brushing his. Simple thing. But I felt it. That flutter. That barely there spark that wasn't supposed to be there. I stared at the TV, heart suddenly loud in my chest, and wondered, not for the first time, what would happen if I stopped pretending that I didn't feel it. If I stopped hiding from what had been quietly building between us. Chris shifted beside me, resting his head on the arm of the couch, his voice low. You okay? I nodded too quickly. Yeah. Just tired. He didn't push. He never did. But when he looked at me again I knew he saw it. The hesitation. The weight of the unsaid. And neither of us said a word. Not yet. Chris called while I was brushing my teeth, his voice lit with that kind of buzz only good news brings. Mom, he said, skipping hello altogether, you're not gonna believe this. I just booked a new shoot. It's for Adeline Line and it's happening this weekend. I laughed around a mouthful of foam. Look at you. Mr. Connections. They said they want edgy. And they mentioned the word mature energy at least 3 times. He paused. I don't know what that means, but I said yes before they could change their minds. I wiped my mouth with a towel, grinning. Of course you did. That's your brand. Confident impulsivity. What can I say? He replied smoothly. They need charisma and I'm a generous man. I didn't think much of it until 2 hours later when my agent called. You're on the list, she said. Adeline Line wants you for the shoot. Urban sophistication meets timeless elegance. You're exactly what they're looking for. For a split second I hesitated. Then I laughed. Let me guess, I said. Chris is going to be there? Already confirmed, she replied. They said it's a mother-son concept. Edgy but intimate. Think classic meets modern. You two are a visual match. I couldn't help but smile. Of course. Of all the shoots in all the cities, it had to be this one. When Chris saw me walk onto set the next day, he let out a bark of laughter. You're kidding. I raised an eyebrow as I slid my jacket off, revealing a black silk blouse that clung to my frame. Don't act so surprised. Apparently they wanted someone cool and timeless. You sure they didn't mean ageless? Careful, I warned, grinning. I still outranked you. The shoot went smoother than I expected. There was a kind of rhythm between us that made things easier. Unspoken, instinctive. The camera loved him, of course, but it loved us together even more. Every time we leaned into one another, every glance or half-smile, it captured something that wasn't just posed. Something real. Afterward, with the adrenaline still humming in our blood, Chris tugged on his jacket and said, Let's go eat. You me. Just like the old days. We ended up at a little bistro tucked into the corner of Fairfax. One of those candlelit places that smelled like rosemary and nostalgia. We sat across from each other, laughing at the weird poses we'd been asked to do. You need to hold her face like she's your whole world, the photographer had said. Chris had whispered, Isn't that already true? The waiter brought wine. A deep, ruby-red bottle that Chris insisted on ordering like he was some connoisseur, though I knew full well he picked it because the label looked cool. He leaned back, cradling the glass in one hand, studying me. You were amazing today, he said simply. I gave a soft laugh. You're biased. No, seriously, he said, his tone shifting. You outshined everyone. The crew loved you. Even Melina, the makeup girl, said you looked like you stepped out of a fashion film. Well, she's young and generous. Chris shook his head. No, Mom. You're not hearing me. He sat forward, eyes intent, voice quieter now. You've got this energy, like you're of this world. Not some dusty grown-up who still says things like hip and cellular telephone. You're sharp. Funny. You don't take yourself too seriously. And you're still the most beautiful woman in any room you walk into. I blinked, caught off guard. That wasn't a son talking about his mom. That was a man talking about a woman he deeply admired. Chris. He held up a hand not to silence me but to steady the air between us. I mean it. I've met so many people through modeling, women who try so hard to be relevant, to be seen. And then there's you. You don't try, you just are. I smiled, unsure of what to do with the warmth flooding my chest. You really are a charmer. Maybe, he said, swirling the wine in his glass. But it's not just charm. It's truth. Then he exhaled, slow, deliberate, and leaned closer, his voice dropping low. Sometimes I wish you weren't my mother. The words landed between us like a dropped glass, not shattering but loud. Crystalline. Fragile. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He kept his gaze locked with mine. There was no shame in it. No apology. Sometimes, he continued, I wish you were someone I met on a set. Someone I could ask out. Someone I could fall in love with without it being complicated. My heart beat so hard it echoed in my ears. I felt the familiar rush of disbelief, the old instinct to laugh things off, to redirect. But I didn't. I just sat there. Because in the silence that followed, I felt something shift. Not just in the air, but inside me. You shouldn't say that, I whispered finally, the candlelight flickering between us. I know, he replied. But he didn't take it back. And I didn't ask him to. We didn't talk much on the drive home. Chris had offered to take the long route back through the hills. Good air, he said with a forced lightness. But we both knew it wasn't about the breeze. It was about the quiet. The space to let the moment breathe. I stared out the window, city lights flickering past like thoughts I couldn't hold on to. His words echoed in my mind not because they were wrong but because they were too easy to believe. Too familiar. Sometimes I wish you weren't my mother. What startled me most wasn't the words themselves. It was how natural they had felt, how deeply a part of me already knew. I wasn't naive. I'd spent years analyzing glances, gestures, tones in people's voices. It was practically a second language in our world, the modeling world, where what you don't say is often louder than what you do. I had seen it in Chris before. In the way his eyes sometimes lingered, in the warmth behind his teasing, in the way he would compliment me like I wasn't just his mother, but a woman who still held mystery. We pulled into the driveway just past midnight. The porch light glowed softly against the siding of the house. Our little home, the place that had witnessed everything from his kindergarten tantrums to our runway prep sessions. He put the car in park and looked over at me. "Are we okay?" His voice was quiet. Not afraid, Chris rarely was, but cautious, as though he knew we were standing on a narrow ledge and wasn't sure how far we'd already leaned. I turned to him, offering a smile I hoped would anchor us. "We're fine," I said. He nodded but didn't move. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I needed to say it. Even if nothing ever comes of it. I just needed you to know how much I admire you. Not just as my mom but as a person." He stopped there and I knew the word he wasn't saying. I undid my seatbelt slowly. "I know," I replied. "And you didn't make me uncomfortable." We both sat still for a beat longer, the hum of the engine fading into silence. Then without another word we went inside. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the covers pulled to my chin, my room dim and still, but my thoughts were anything but quiet. There was a part of me, the older, wiser voice I'd always trusted, telling me to put this away. To lock the feeling in a drawer and close it tight. But there was another part. A quieter voice. One that hadn't spoken in years. It asked things like, "When was the last time someone really saw you? Not the model, not the mother. You. When was the last time admiration felt like more than politeness? When was the last time you were allowed to feel desired, not for your looks or your past, but for the fire still in your voice? For the laughter you carried like armor?" I thought about all the men I had gone on dates with, the ones Chris and I had made fun of. How I joked that they dressed like grandfathers and flirted like accountants. How none of them had made me feel the way I felt now. Hurt. Alive. The next morning I found him in the kitchen, shirtless and barefoot, flipping pancakes with a grin that said nothing had changed. I admired that about him. His ability to let heavy things hang without dragging them through the room. He glanced at me, spatula in hand. "You okay?" "I'm okay." He tilted his head. "Are we pretending last night didn't happen?" I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "No," I said. "We're not pretending. But we're also not rushing." A slow smile touched his lips. "I can work with that." We sat at the table eating pancakes and sipping black coffee like we did every Sunday. Except now, every word felt like it carried two meanings. Every shared glance shimmered with something else. Possibility. Caution. A current under the surface, invisible but unmistakable. Later that week we were booked for another campaign. This time an outdoor shoot along the cliffs in Big Sur. Earth tones, wind-blown hair, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. Chris drove us as usual, music low, sunglasses on, one hand on the wheel. "Do you ever think," he said out of nowhere, "that we ended up like this because no one else could understand us?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He kept his eyes on the road, the ocean to our left, endless and blue. "I mean, maybe we stopped trying with other people because it was always so easy with each other. Same work. Same humor. Same rhythm." I didn't answer right away. But I thought about it. Really thought. Because maybe he was right. Maybe the comfort we found in one another had built something sacred. A bond not just between mother and son, but between two people who had shared everything. Loss, survival, ambition, joy. Who had seen each other at their worst and still chosen to stay. And now it was something else too. The shoot that day was exhausting. Wind whipping our clothes, sun in our eyes, hours of retakes and awkward angles. But there was a moment, just one, when we stood together on a bluff, the photographer calling for intimacy. Look at each other like you're all the other person has, she said. And we did. And I knew I wasn't acting. We didn't talk much on the ride back from Big Sur. But everything was louder. The silence hummed with memory, that moment on the cliff when our eyes met and the wind died around us and we weren't just mother and son anymore. We were two people standing in a photograph that would never fade, holding something unspeakable between us. At the shoot, the photographer had clapped her hands and called it perfect. But Chris and I hadn't moved. We kept looking. Just looking. He'd taken my hand then for the frame, of course. But he didn't let go when the camera lowered. Not right away. He didn't speak as we drove, his fingers drumming softly against the steering wheel, his gaze steady on the road. I watched the shadows play across his face as the sun slipped behind the horizon, and I felt something terrifying and true blooming in the quiet. When we got home, I headed straight for the kitchen. Habit. Something to do. I pulled out a bottle of wine, opened a cabinet, closed it again. My hands were shaking, barely, but enough to know I wasn't imagining it anymore. Chris stepped in behind me. I could feel him before he said anything. His presence had always been louder than his words. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, tentative. I turned to him. "No," I said. "I'm not." He nodded slowly. "Me neither." And then we just stared at each other. No pretending. No coy deflections or playful banter to hide behind. Just the truth finally breathing between us. Chris moved closer. So close I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the line of his collarbone where his shirt hung open, the way his eyes held mine like they were the only thing keeping him steady. "I've tried," he whispered. "I've tried not to feel this. I've told myself 1,000 times it's wrong. But no matter how far I push it down, it always comes back." My breath hitched. "I know." And I did. Every time we laughed too hard, every time we danced in the living room to some old song, every time I caught him watching me like I was more than just mom, I'd known. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. His fingers barely touched my skin, but it lit something in me that had been sleeping for years. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "But if you feel it too, even a little." I didn't let him finish. I leaned in, and for a second, just 1 second, everything else disappeared. The kiss was soft, breathless. Like we were touching something forbidden and sacred at the same time. It didn't feel like crossing a line. It felt like coming home. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to explain. Chris rested his forehead against mine, his hands still on my waist. "I don't know what this means," he said. "I just know I can't pretend anymore." I nodded, my voice caught somewhere in my throat. "Me neither." We sat on the floor of the living room after that, legs tangled, wine glasses forgotten on the table. We didn't talk about labels or rules or the world outside. We just were. "I've always felt closest to you," he said at one point, his fingers tracing lazy circles on my palm. "Even before I could name it. You've always been the person I trusted the most." I closed my eyes. "I don't think it's just because we're family. I think it's because we see each other. Really see." The night unfolded slowly, like a confession written in the stars. No fireworks. No declarations. Just the steady unraveling of everything we'd kept buried. When I woke the next morning, the sun streaming in through the curtains, Chris was still beside me, head resting lightly against my shoulder, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. And I realized something. This didn't feel like a mistake. It felt inevitable. We never announced anything. Never told anyone. Our lives, at least outwardly, went on. We modeled. We laughed. We went to shoots, posed beside one another, our eyes carrying the secret of 1,000 unspoken truths. And in the quiet moments when the world wasn't watching, in the space between responsibilities and reality, we lived in something that had no name. Love, yes. But not the kind defined by tradition. It was something else. Something deeper. Woven not just through time but through a shared soul. One that had taken shelter in the only place it had ever been safe. In each other.